If you want to have colonies of shrimp like this and like this, be sure to stay tuned to this series. Hello everyone and welcome back. If you're not subscribed and you love seeing lots and lots of shrimp, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I also started up a Patreon account, which you can find in the description below. This is going to be the start of a series that goes over some shrimp basics, some of the things that I wished I would have known when I first started shrimp keeping. I'm going to focus on choosing the correct aquarium and also choosing the correct substrate for the species of shrimp that you want to keep. If you're interested in these topics, stick around. When I go about choosing my tank size, I find that my larger aquariums do just a little bit better than my smaller ones. And up here I have two 33 gallons, a 20 long, two 25s, three 10s, a 15, and another 33. I also have a 5-gallon coal tank for my Neos right here. When I go about setting up a new shrimp tank, I have to think about a couple of things before I do that. And one of them is, how big do I want this tank to be? And if it's a used tank like all of mine are, was this tank ever treated with any kind of copper medication? This is my 5-gallon coal tank. I use this one for my Neocardinas, and I am going to give them a little bit of an upgrade because this one's getting way overstocked. But I was noticing when I first started keeping shrimp, this was one of my first shrimp tanks that I owned. Now, I wasn't getting bad breeding in it, but it really is hard to keep the water parameters stable in such a small tank. If I would slack off and not do my water changes right when I needed to do them, or I didn't top it up right away and the water level got down about a third, when I topped it up, almost all the parameters of this tank would change. And shrimp really don't like a lot of change in aquariums. That's not to say that you can't have a high success rate with a small tank, because this one here has buried females and baby shrimp almost everywhere. I had mentioned something about copper before, and this only occurs in used tanks when the previous owner may have used some kind of copper medication in that tank. The problem with copper medication is that sometimes it can stay on the glass or the silicone in the aquarium far past after the water has been taken out. Now, I personally haven't had any problem with copper in my tanks, but I have seen on forums and on shrimp groups that people have lost entire colonies due to the previous owner of the tank dosing some kind of copper medication. Copper is one of those things that shrimp just can't tolerate. If there's any form of copper in the tank, most of the time you're going to see deaths everywhere, and it's just going to be a whole bad experience from the start. Moving on to substrate. This is where I struggled the absolute most when I first started shrimp keeping. There are two different kinds of substrates when it comes to shrimp. One is an inert substrate and one is an active substrate. For the most part, the active substrates look like little dirt pellets, like your Fluval stratum or your ADA Amazonia. And what these have in them is an ingredient called peat. And what peat does is it will drop the pH to around anywhere from a 5.5 to a 6.6 for the most part. A lot of the Neocardina, well, all of the Neocardina really don't like those water parameters. That's not to say that they won't survive and be just fine. I noticed that I was never getting ideal breeding or a high success rate of babies in my active substrate Neocardina tanks. When I finally figured this out and I moved all of my Neocardina into an inert substrate, which doesn't affect water parameters whatsoever, my success rate went through the roof. And that's when I realized that Neocardina and Cardina like vastly different water parameters. And that's why I keep all of my neocaridina in an inert substrate and all of my caridina in a buffering substrate or active substrate. Another thing to look out for in your active substrates is most of them were designed for plants. And they have a lot of fertilizers in them, which when you first set the tank up, it will release an absolute ton of ammonia. And this means that you have to wait a pretty long time for these tanks to cycle when you're using an active substrate, because if you decide to put shrimp in early, chances are they're not going to make it, and I've made that mistake before too. That's why it's always great to have some test kits to check if you're using an active substrate. I don't want to confuse anybody with my cherry tank, because this is flue ball stratum in here, but the thing about active substrates is that they don't last forever. They last anywhere between 1 to 3 years depending on which brand you buy. And this substrate is about 5 to 6 years old, so it is long past its buffering capacity. Like, it will no longer affect my pH, and that's why my colony of cherries has just exploded in this tank, and it has been for years. In this tank is an active substrate. This is 88 Amazonia, and it brings my pH down to about a 6. And what else this substrate does is it will strip the cage out of the water. And that's where the caridina love this substrate. They don't like cage. But in your neocaridina, they like a little bit of cage. And that's why when I'm keeping my neos, I like to have about a 4 or 5 cage. And with buffering substrate, you'll never get that. You might get it off the bat, but then eventually after maybe a day or two, the substrate is going to do what it's designed to do, and that's drop the pH and strip the cage. Now that is one of the reasons why I had such a hard time keeping shrimp at first, because I was trying to keep my KH and GH up, and I didn't really understand that it was the substrate that was causing me to lose all my KH and the pH to drop. Once again, I hope everybody enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, please do so. And I hope everybody has a wonderful day, and cheers.